Hello and welcome to NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. I'm Kevin Ochsner. Thanks for joining us. There are signs out of Washington, D.C. that the Trump administration plans to lessen or even eliminate many of the federal regulations that have become a burden to cattle producers. One example is an indication that President Trump and the new administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency will ditch the proposed expansion of federal authority under the Waters of the United States, or WOTUS rule. This and other regulatory rollbacks are especially welcome news for ranchers that make their living on federal lands. Joining us now to share some insights on this important topic is Ethan Lane. He's the Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and NCBA Federal Lands. Thanks for joining us, Ethan.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
NCBA scored a big victory recently with some action on the Bureau of Land Management's Planning 2.0 rule. Can you tell us a little bit about that rule and what happened in Washington with regard to that?
Sure. The Planning 2.0 rule was BLM's attempt to totally reorganize the way they do federal land management planning in the West. We had a variety of concerns with this rule. We've been leading the charge opposing it since last year. Everything from a deprioritization of local input and the role of state directors in that planning process to elimination of the need for comprehensive economic impact evaluation, and also a focus on environmental and social change rather than that critical mandate of multiple use and sustained yield that the BLM is charged with upholding. Across the board, we just felt like this was a direction the BLM shouldn't be going with their land management planning. We need to scrap this rule and get back to the drawing board.
From wolves to the sage grouse to the lesser prairie chicken, endangered species rules often have a big impact on cattlemen. What's the latest on endangered species issues, and how's it looking for significant reform on the Endangered Species Act over the coming year?
Well, as we've talked about before, the Endangered Species Act has become a major source of burden for cattle producers across the West and more across the country. Whether it's the lesser prairie chicken, as you mentioned, that covers 5 states from Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas, to the sage grouse in the West that was found not warranted for listing, but in order to achieve that not warranted decision required a large set of resource management plans that are proving to be, in some cases, worse than a listing, to the gray wolf, which in many parts of the country is totally recovered. Places like Minnesota, you have thousands of wolves. We've blown past those recovery targets, and yet the wolf remains on the list. And states like Oregon and Washington have comprehensive plans in place to manage this species. There's simply no need for it to still be on the list. So we're focusing on putting some reforms in place to the Endangered Species Act that'll make it work better and focus on those species that truly need the support. We know that more than 2,000 species are currently listed on the Endangered Species Act, and about 1,000 or more of those are domestic species, and about 51% of those domestic species lack a recovery plan. So you have all the restrictions of a listing, and you have no path forward for producers or anyone else looking to conserve those species. What we're going to be asking for and continuing to work with Chairman Barrasso in the Senate and Chairman Bishop in the House is to put that recovery planning right up front in the process. Our view is that if you have enough information to deem that a species is warranted for listing under the Endangered Species Act, then you certainly have enough information to know if that species is, what those recovered numbers look like and what the path forward looks like. And if you don't have that information, we feel like you don't have enough information to list. So we'll be focusing on getting those kinds of controls into place and also streamlining that delisting process. Currently, you have to apply to get a species delisted. We feel like once those benchmarks are met, automatic delisting should be the rule. So we'll be working with Congress to get some of those changes moving forward into place.
Now, we heard Ryan Zink was recently confirmed as the new U.S. Secretary of the Interior. How do you think new leadership at that agency is going to affect cattlemen and cattlewomen?
Well, we're excited for Secretary Zinke to take command over at the Department of Interior. You know, he's from the West, he's from Montana. He understands the issues we face in rural communities in the West with a large federal footprint. He was a member of the Natural Resources Committee. We have a great relationship with Mr. Zinke, as do our friends with the Montana stock growers and others. So we look forward to a really open and productive relationship with the new leadership at Department of Interior. It'll be an opportunity to really get some things done for producers and get some needed changes in place, some needed reforms, and get that agency back to managing for multiple use and sustained yield.
Now, Ethan, we've heard some folks out west are incorrectly telling ranchers that have grazing permits on public lands that they aren't merely permittees, but also allotment owners. Can you tell us what that's all about and why it's so dangerous for ranchers with grazing permits?
Yeah, this is an issue that really ties into a lot of things we see in the West with federal land management. It's a frustrating set of issues. Any producer that's operating with federal grazing permits knows that the federal government can be maddening to deal with. We certainly understand that frustration. We fight for relief on those issues every day. But sometimes people get into this conversation that are selling producers on simple solutions to a lot of the complex problems we're facing. And the simple answer is there just aren't a lot of easy answers there. And so in particular, this new group, this Range Allotment Owners Association, has advocated the theory that we're not just permittees operating on federal lands, but in fact, permittees own their allotments. And I won't go into the extent of the detail on that, but the simple description is that they trace the laws all the way back to Spanish land grant days and say that because of the way those laws progressed, you own your allotment and therefore you can cross out what you don't like on your permit and send it back to the agency and they're going to be fine with that. We simply don't agree. We don't think our protections go that far and we certainly don't think that's something we defend. So we wanted to make sure that as these folks move around the country advancing this theory, that producers understood both sides of the story and understood that as an industry we've talked to some of the best lawyers in the business and they disagree with that opinion. So we wanted to make sure that information was out there and available to our members.
Well, Ethan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, for more information on regulatory challenges and the issues that impact federal lands and the ranchers that graze there, be sure to visit the website publiclandscouncil.org.